Hi everyone, Alon here. I'm the CEO of October Health. Really excited today. I've got the Gen Z guy with me, Marko Stavrou from Stavrou Consulting. We're here to unpack everything Gen Z. So any questions, any myths, any truths, we're here to talk about. So with that, Marko, great to have you here.
Thank you so much. And yeah, it's great to kind of come full circle with our relationship and just the work we're doing. I think feel like it connects and aligns a lot.
So we connected probably 2 years ago for the first time, and it's great to see you grow from strength to strength. Maybe for the audience, those who may not be familiar with you, mind introducing yourself, telling them a bit about what you're doing at Stavrou Consulting, a bit about yourself personally, and we'll go forward from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, I'm 19 years old, and hopefully that doesn't take away from all my credibility and authority and people, move to the next video. But started my first business at age 12 in high school, and that was selling sneakers and sweets. So always kind of had the entrepreneurship DNA, and, my grandparents were all entrepreneurs. And then kind of went into the marketing world and, interned for various marketing agencies overseas, and kind of got, started posting on my own Instagram in 2015 and entering this world of both media and communications, but then also youth. I was the only young person going to events at age 15, and everyone kept on saying, Marko, the young entrepreneur, and Marko, the young guy at these events. And so that kind of youth sentiment started coming across. And, as I developed my career and my business, which today is an advisory and consulting company around specifically connecting organizations to Gen Z, this Gen Z guy title came about, and, now, on LinkedIn, that's kind of my go-to.
Awesome. So for those who can't see, Marko's wearing awesome sneakers today. So the Gen Z guy, I think maybe let's start with, what is Gen Z, right? For those who may not know, I think it's a term we hear a lot, but I don't think people actually understand. Who is Gen Z? What are some common themes that we hear around Gen Z?
And the crazy thing is, most people, like you said, most people are listening to this right now, hear this word Gen Z, but when I sit in a room with executives, they don't even know who that specific people group is, right? They think they're in their 30s, or the Gen Z are millennials, or, they literally have no clear understanding. But yet, 5% of ABSA's workforce is already Gen Z. 25% of Ghana's MTN is already Gen Z. So it's a prominent workforce. The buying power is over $680 billion globally. 40% of Africa's youth. So we need to be taking this generation and this group of people seriously, both from an employability point of view and then from a consumer point of view. And so, they're born. What's important around this, because there's a lot of different opinions around when exactly they are grouped, but the general consensus is between 1995 and 2010. So the youngest being 13 and the oldest being, 28, 29. And so I think that's important because it gives you kind of a frame of who you're working with, and, when engaging with someone, understanding some of their nuances and characteristics. But more importantly, besides from the date, it's actually the events that define them. So we call them defining events. And for example, for Gen Z, one of them is the 2008 crash. So they grew up with parents experiencing real deep financial pressures. Many of their parents' businesses went under, they got, retrenched. And that affects the way they both see the world, they see their own personal finances, and then, of course, giving back to their families. And then another big event is COVID-19, and so I'm sure we'll go into more depth around that.
Yeah, super interesting. I think if we look at Gen Z and we unpack that, what are some traits that are common? And obviously we're generalizing here, but what are some common traits that we see amongst Gen Z?
And this is where, the Gen Xers and the boomers love to label us, they're entitled, and, they don't have any instant gratification, and they can't deal with resilience, and, all these titles that I'm sure if you're sitting, watching this right now, you're thinking, I love asking when I enter a space, what is the first word you think of when it comes to Gen Z? I mean, you can answer quickly now.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, probably work-life balance.
Yeah. Or play hard, work easy, or, hybrid, and they want flexibility. So all these things, of course, have truths. And one of the biggest things, I love this quote that says, every generation is more conservative than the next one and see the next one as liberal views. So I really do believe that to be true. And, even myself, looking at my sister who's 8 years old, I'm like, oh my word, her views are so liberal and I'm so conservative. So I think we do need to be careful in terms of, I do believe, obviously every generation has overlapping arches, and it's, every generation thinks that the other one is going through these certain things. But with technologies changing, I mean, the internet is more advanced than ever before. COVID-19 has never happened before. AI has never been prevalent before. Crypto has never been prevalent before. So all these things, of course, have got create subconscious changes in human behavior. I'm the youngest person to be accepted into and graduate from Henry Business School, and all that I do in my program for the last 3 years is study organizational management and people. So I've had a real, one thing that's important. Everything that I do is stats and facts based, because a lot of people see, and this is unfortunately in social media, there's so many young people, just people in general, claiming all these things, but it's not backed by data. And you'll know this working with mental health. It has to be backed by data. Otherwise, to actually get to the root and the source is so difficult, and to solve for that.
Yeah. So no, I think that's clear. And I mean, I think your earlier points around stats and facts are like, I mean, this is the future of your workforce, right? And this is your future consumer. And probably in a big way is actually influencing current buying trends in the market, right? Because we know that like children or the younger generation often set the trend, right? And then it's the older, more conservative generations that follow, right? So it's incredibly important for businesses to understand Gen Z, appreciate Gen Z, understand that nuance. I think maybe to your point, a lot of what's driving this, this view, oh, Gen Z are entitled, is misunderstanding rather than reality.
Yes.
So let's maybe unpack some of that. Like, what is it? Firstly, let's look at, what's important to Gen Z. Like, what is it that Gen Z wants?
So I think firstly, most of Gen Z don't even know what they want. And you can understand it because, I mean, if I ask, what does Alon at 20? Did he knew he was going to be sitting right here running October Health?
Yeah, definitely not.
Definitely not,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I think it's also understandable to say, well, when you're young and you're navigating your career, it's okay not to know what you want. And it's okay not to have full certainty that if you've spent the last 7 years going down a chartered accountant's career and you have this big realization that actually, no, I want to be a crypto trader, that's totally normal. But I think Gen X and, my parents, they didn't have that luxury. They didn't have that opportunity. Whatever their parents told them, they did. I think now that influenced their career. But now with the global stage and access to the internet, you can change careers so quickly, which is actually a negative to Gen Z, because what that does, it creates too many options. So now you're sitting as a young person, you can study any degree overseas. You got all these, social media gurus like telling you that you can make millions when you're young and you can travel the world. And you saying to us, I'm sitting here in my job 9 to 5, working like a dog. Why would I want to do this, And so unfortunately, social media has created this fake depiction of work and of reality that I spend time breaking down with Gen Z, because also their expectations aren't real because they've never entered the workforce. But then also with, executives and corporates, and saying, listen, like forcing them to come in every single day is not an option anymore post-COVID, because they need to go and support their family, or they've got black tax and they're supporting like 20 plus people and you're only paying them 8K, so like navigating those reality changes. And most corporates are like so bottom line driven, so much pressure, and they're not even looking at their people. And so my thing is, let's allocate time to that. And that's where I come in.
Okay, awesome. So it comes down to conversations, right? And facilitating, maybe you're actually a translator between
Correct.
Gen Z and also maybe someone like, whilst being very firmly within that Gen Z bracket, with context and appreciation for what the expectation is in the working world, right? Given your kind of early exposure to that world. But at the same time, you very much know what it's like to be Gen Z with all the, I guess, positives and negatives that come with that. So how do you actually facilitate those discussions, right, within organizations?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is just from a Gen Z point of view, the biggest question I always get is like, okay, like what is Gen Z strengths and weaknesses? And one of the weaknesses is they've got high entitlement, low resilience. And that's just something that I've noticed, and the stats show that, mental health has never been as prevalent as it's been in terms of psychology, and people using doctors to support the medication, and so that's just the stat. And so dealing with like people who can't go through trauma and self-regulate is such a big thing. And that also becomes to like lack of sleep, addiction to technology, addiction to dopamine, because there's more now, we need more dopamine and because of like technology and stress environments. I mean, if you just ask parents who are listening to this right now, they'll tell you like my child's environment and school environment, and you'll notice as a parent, is like way more hectic than I did. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think right now we had an event and like the amount of sensory overload was quite overwhelming, and the kids seemed fine with it. But like I was like, wow, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and you got more extramurals than ever.
Yeah.
Macroeconomics is down. So now the pressure to get a high-paying job versus actually figuring and knowing thyself so that you can know your purpose and go down a path that actually creates fulfillment is now being lost. And I think, unfortunately, universities aren't, it's overpriced and overvalued to get a degree and a piece of paper versus actual experience. So now when these graduates are coming in, they're highly theoretical. They've got these great degrees, but when it comes from an experience and a practicality point of view, dealing with clients, dealing with conflict, they don't have that skill set. And I think that's also something that I do a lot of work with, is like graduate readiness. How do we get grads from in class and on Instagram to actually in reality of work? And that's a big challenge that we can chat about.
Yeah. So how do you, you touched on, this issue with, low resilience, high entitlement, right? Like, so that's very clear. How do you work with organizations, with graduates to, I think there's a skill gap that you spoke to, right? How do you equip them with like tangible real world skills that are going to set them up for success in the organization? And then there's maybe more of an attitude or softer, like, kind of relationship, or, how do you bring yourself to work? What are your expectations around work that you look to address as well? So how do you navigate that with organizations?
So yeah, I think the first thing is, a lot of organizations are getting it right. And one of the things is by having really great influential leaders. So you look at like an investor culture, and specifically around their CA program. I mean, the CAs that are coming from Stellenbosch or wherever it is, they're literally like going to work at 7 and leaving at 6 p.m. And they'll do anything for their boss, and they'll work overtime, and they really want to prove to themselves and to their work environment that they're both capable and actually grow in their career. So there are environments that are fostering that. Same with MTN. One of the MTN policies is like, if my family has an emergency, I drop work immediately and go and deal with that. And that's like really important value for Gen Z, is to be able to both support their family and themselves. So I think like navigating culturally, like creating that in your team where you've got that mentorship. So I always say like mentorship is key, even if it's just an employee who's just above like a manager. Doesn't need to be the CEO and every intern, but creating those dynamics from someone to actually go to. And often it's not going to be the boss, because there's always that fear and that stigma that they can get fired. So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is like creating a time for self-reflection on where do I want to go. So what F&B and R&B do really well is in their graduate programs, they actually allow you to go team by team. So you're spending time with different teams in different workspaces versus, okay, one graduate program focused on one type of work, and you're getting that job, and now you're not exposed to anything else. So I think giving them that time to really think about what work they actually enjoy, and that applies to their life, so that they can figure that out.
Okay, so if I kind of pick out the themes there, the first is, the value of mentorship and kind of role modeling for these graduates that are entering the workforce. The second piece is giving them flexibility, right, in a way that's important to them and allows them to kind of live their life and still deliver. And that third piece is, maybe if I can define it as exposure, broad exposure, because often these graduates are entering the workforce and that they know maybe high level what it is. I want to be within a bank, but they don't know what team or what area or what specialization yet. So giving them that ability to experience through doing, not just in a theoretical sense.
I mean, like the amount of young people who think suits with the reality of, legal entities is crazy. People actually think that's what you do as a lawyer. And so when you actually go and you have to be an article clerk for 2 years and you got books and papers of this much to go through every day, that was me. I wanted to be a lawyer, and so I didn't go job shadow at Weber Wenzel, and I realized, oh my word, like this is so far from me. But both I needed to go and get the exposure, and I need to know myself.
Yeah, and you don't know until you try.
Exactly, well, that's the big thing, and not enough parents are pushing their children into workspaces. Invite them to your work, invite them to your friends' work, invite them to get the school to force them into different, environments. And then also like psychometric testing. I've done every psychometric test under the book to kind of gauge who am I? Like, what makes me tick? What makes me frustrated? Just from an internal perspective. And I think, we go to these career counselors and I have a big, confliction with them because it's like they're basing everything off your results. Yes, that's important, but that's only one facet of life. And you'll know this as an entrepreneur. Life changes so fast. If you're basing everything on one perspective of what you're good at, it's not enough to get you through the tribulations and the trials of life because you'll just give up. You're like, I can't do this anymore. This is like, it's so against every single grain of my body and it's taking away energy from me. And I think, that's a big point.
So saying what we see in our own data, and we deal with a lot of professional services clients, is that burnout and flight risk are generally highest amongst your Gen Z cohort. So what do you think it is? And I think we've touched on some of these points that's driving that behavior, and why do Gen Z feel so much more pressure than the rest of an organization?
So I think there's a stat, I think my dad gave me the other day, I can't remember. I think South Africa is like top 3 most difficult and resilient cities or countries in the world. Like, it's the most difficult to live in just because of all from security to, unemployment, all these factors that create such pressure for people to deal with. So I think one is we have to look at the macro and say, okay, go from a country point of view, it's really challenging to live in South Africa. And then 2 is obviously from a human element. We've got technology and internet, which my generation grew up with, and everything's about, so there's a theory called comparison theory, which basically states we make decisions based on the opinions of others. And this is now more prevalent than ever because in social media, all you're doing is comparing your highs, because everyone's social media is their high life, right? Like their best versions of themselves. And so now you're constantly comparing yourself to not only people in South Africa, but globally. So now your friend's sitting in London and they got this new job at EY, and you're like, oh my word, he's earning £26,000 and I'm only earning £10,000, but we did the same degree. Or you got a friend in the US and they're traveling LA or they're traveling Miami and they're living this high life, and you're sitting in, Durban, and you're like living out of this tiny little house and, got this financial pressure. And so you then start to create insecurities around yourself, around your family, around your work, which then, kind of affect your mental health. And then I think it's like, as I said, there's too many options. And so it actually becomes really hard to decide, what school do I go to? Where do I send, where do I study? And that's a big thing that I spend a lot of time speaking to parents about, is like, career choice and life choices. And it's tough because there's also like more divorce than ever. So like people don't have certainty in their families. There's also most disconnection because we think, and this is a big thing, Gen Z honestly believe that voice notes and text is a real form of communication, but it's not. It's not real. Sending a voice note to break up with your girlfriend or boyfriend is not real. So you cannot do that. You have to actually engage with them in person. And I think through COVID, which has highlighted this disconnection and made people draw away from each other more than ever, we can't deal with conflict and people in real life. And so that also creates a huge, number of challenges, because now Gen Z believe that their life online and their life, over a screen is their reality, and it's not. And so when you force them into a work environment and you tell them to do a presentation, they're like, freak. They have a psychotic episode because they're like, what do I do here? I'm like, I've never dealt with this in my life. The only thing I've only ever done an interview over Zoom. I've only ever done a CV over Canva or whatever the platform they use. I've only ever engaged with people older than me over WhatsApp. I've never spent a one-on-one conversation with my uncle. It's all been through Skype because he lives in London and I live in Australia. And so those are some of the things that I would mention.
Okay, that makes sense. And some of these things are understandable, right? And I mean, so let's unpack that, right? So your points around comparison, like, what is your like feedback, both, to organization, if they're running sessions for their kind of Gen Z cohort or for individuals that fall within Gen Z, like, how do you avoid that, right? Like, I mean, is it just as simple as saying, listen, guys, that's not reality. Don't benchmark yourself to an unrealistic expectation of what life should be?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I think I find this a lot when I speak to managers, especially at Henley, because, all the people studying there are all managers. And I say to them, like, you guys are going to have to end up doing more parenting than employing, because the Gen Z have lacked parenting because their parents are working so hard because there's such financial pressures and uncertainty that they lack just the basic etiquettes of dealing with conflict and communicating. And so managers and people in the workspace are actually having to parent, and like say, listen, okay, cool. If you got lack of sleep, this is what you do. You can't just take 100 tablets. You actually have to deal with it. If you're going through tough periods and someone's passed away, like, who do you go to? Again, like, we're one of the most lonely generations. Like, we are so lonely. I think it's the average, like, men in the States, they've got one close friend. I think that's across multiple generations, but you can imagine for Gen Z what that means. So I think, as organizations, it's tough because Gen Z are also so competitive, but it can be used in a positive light, and because it creates urgency. But I think what we do dangerously is if we telling them that they're versing other 100 candidates, what does that make them feel like? If it's just a number, if they're just answering something on LinkedIn and there's 1,000 other people, it's like, no one's going to give feedback to me. No one's going to let me know. And that's, I think, a first step organizations can do is like, I've got this phrase called keep it hot. Honest, open, and give feedback immediately. They don't want to wait 3 weeks for performance reviews. They don't want to wait for quarterly reviews to be told what they need to do better. Go to them on the spot and tell them what they can improve on. I think, if we can be more genuine around less candidates, more quality, and give them feedback and tell them, hey, listen, this is why you didn't get the job. How many times I've spoken to young people and they said, we've applied to 100 jobs and no one's gotten back to us. So what do they know about working on? What do they know about how to improve what they're doing? And I think that's something organizations can do.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense and comes down to authenticity and power of communication, right? And I think it goes both ways. And something which we love to talk about is this power of real-time and genuine feedback, right? Even if it's critical, but giving it with the view to improve, right? So you touched on recruiting, right? And, going back to our earlier conversation, Gen Z are your future workforce, right? And I think a lot of what you've mentioned, while like you hear these kind of murmurs around Gen Z and you feel like, well, maybe I don't want, but a lot of this is manageable, right? I think if you provide individuals with the right guidance, the right support, the right structure, they will flourish in the organization, right? So these are the individuals you want to be hiring. What can you do as an organization to attract, top Gen Z talent?
And I love how you added at the end there now, because I mentioned in the beginning, top talent. So much so a lot of organizations, even in like minuscule roles such as like, a call center or sales rep, like we'll accept whatever we get because we believe that there's a lack of skill. And in many ways there is. I think like South Africa has a real skill shortage, especially around the experience, which I mentioned. But I think just creating a team of winners attracts other winners. And so really believing as an HR recruiter that you can attract the best talent. So now what does it mean to attract the best talent? And some of the facets around that. I review so many LinkedIn job posts and it's like they don't have the salary range. They don't have the career growth. They don't have the breakdowns of requirements. They don't have the roles and responsibilities. So you're applying to a job you know nothing about and waiting for the third interview to be told what's actually in the job. And you're like, I just want to know if this aligns with, can I actually live in Rudaport and, travel to Bryanston and travel 40 minutes in traffic? So some of those basic things are crucial. And then
it's about transparency.
Yeah, transparency and just being open and actually laying it all on the cards, because then you're not going to waste your time getting all these respondents when actually they never ever thought about, they would have never responded. But just because they're so desperate or because they didn't have the right details, they then applied. And then I think just like from a job posting point of view, if you're an HR person, number one is salary, like showing the financial remunerations. Second is the flexibility. Do they have to come in every day? Do they come in 3 days a week? Are they working virtually? Can they leave the job at 5 o'clock, or do they have to, stay till 7? And then lastly is like the career growth. So can they actually grow in this position, in this organization? Or are they going to be stuck there for 10 years with nothing, to see for it? And so like those are the three most important things from a stats point of view that Gen Z are looking for.
So I think that final point's a super interesting one, right? Because again, perception around Gen Z is not that they'll be the most loyal, right? And they want to actually build a long-term career within an organization. But what you're saying is that provided an individual from Gen Z feels that they've got growth, that they're growing, that they're learning new things, like they're developing, there's no reason why they wouldn't stick with one organization.
100%.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing to hear, right? Because again, I think that goes against the stereotype that you hear, and that's something which I think a lot of individuals want within an organization. It's an easy step or change that an organization can make to set up themselves as an employer of choice.
Yeah, I think, that's well said. And I think what I've noticed also is people want to grow with people. So if you're creating, and I often say this, the people that the HR person assigns these Gen Z to is often more important than the work. So people will stay because they love the team, even though they don't enjoy the work. But so often we like, okay, cool, does this person have the skills? Okay, align them with this type of work. But then actually when you do a cultural audit around, like, is this a team that they would fit in? They don't like the leader. They don't fit in with the crowd. They got no personal, similar hobbies. They haven't spent any time. They're total uncomfortability in terms of, age and demographic and all of those factors. So I think try and get reframe the way you look at hiring in terms of it's about the people, and it's about linking Gen Z to people that they love, because they'll stay and they'll commit and they'll be loyal to those people.
So how do you work out what they want? I mean, that's I could make assumptions, but to your point, I don't know what another person wants, right? So how do organizations actually figure that out? What do you suggest?
Yeah, so I think, just doing cultural audits around different teams. Every team is so different within a big organization. So knowing your different leadership styles is key. And then also doing some psychometric testing. So really looking at the new young Gen Z graduate as a person. How do they work? Are they detail oriented? Are they not? How do looking at their habits and that, and then linking it to those teams is vital. But I think often we just, when I look at these organizations, they don't have capacity. And I'm hoping that that's my role and your role in October Health is let's enhance what you guys have. We know you got policies. We know you value mental health. But what your staff are saying is that we're not seeing that. So bring us in and allow us to enhance what you've already got. And I think those small changes can make such a big impact,
Yeah, you've touched on mental health, and you're Gen Z, right? So you're from this, most, vulnerable, at-risk population that we've seen, or generation that we've seen, but you're putting yourself under more pressure, right? You're studying, you're working, you taking a less common path.
Yeah.
Right. How do you manage your own well-being?
Yeah, it's terribly tough, and I want to be vulnerable and say what you see again online is not real. It's a persona, it's a personality, it's what people are putting out there. It's just the highest points of their life. And so I think through a lot of what I've gone through is a lot of loneliness to then my real community. So the friends that I have now and the family that I have are people that I really, really value in my advisory board and people in my business. But you have to go through a period of people not wanting to associate with you, people not wanting to be with what you're doing, people are going against what you're saying for them to find your real tribe. So I think that's one thing, is community is so important. I can't tell you how many investors that I've spoken to say to me, Marko, you would be a billionaire if you went to the US. You would be a billionaire if you went to London. Why are you sitting in South Africa? And my response is to them, I don't want to give away my soul and give away my mental health just so I can make more money. I want to stay with my families. I want to stay with my friends. And so I think Gen Z often, and I speak to, and looking at some of my friends, it's all about materialistic things. It's all about, having this great career. It's all about making all this money, but we forget about the things that are most, and you'll know this because Gen Z they haven't spent 30 years in this life. It's nice having a Range Rover, but when you get home, when you got no one, a family, you got no wife, you got no partner, and you're saying to yourself, what do I really have?
Yeah. So it's about that support in that community.
So that community. And then the second part is my health.
Yeah.
so we were chatting about this earlier. I played pickleball for South Africa, and I play paddle tennis every single week, and I'm outside. And if I monitor my screen time, and I use this product called the Whoop, which monitors my sleep. So I'm very serious at a young age about my health, my diet. And I look at a lot of young people, and they're addicted to, vaping, and addicted to drugs and alcohol. And then they're asking, but I get home and I'm like, I'm sick. I can't like function. I've got mental like brain fog. I can't work. I can't focus. And you can't expect to have any of those things if you're doing all the wrong things. Now, of course, everyone needs something to, to deal with the life challenges. For me, it's business. For me, it's paddle tennis. For me, it's pickleball. For me, it's going for coffee with people that I really admire. And I think that comes back to the self-reflection. Find your point of where you're able to deal with challenges. And it can be in relationships, which often is for me as well. It's like, I sometimes just have a person who I'll phone and I'll literally just chat about challenges, and we'll just chat about challenges. We won't talk about any positive, we will keep it real. And I think having people like that in your life is so vitally important. And then prioritizing your health.
Yeah, so it's about, I guess, finding your support, right, and not thinking that you have to do it alone. And, they might not come easy, but you've got to just keep on looking. And then your point around just, looking after yourself, right, which I think is often when you're young, you think you can get away with anything, right? You don't need to prioritize.
You think you're invincible.
Yeah.
You think you're invincible, and the stats are so alarming. My dad being a doctor, it's like more and more young people are going into his office and have got chronic disease. They've got, dyslexia. They've got a whole bunch of psychometric and, they can't function, and it's like, if that's starting at 20, what are you going to be at 30? You're going to be at 40. What are you going to be at 50? Are you going to be around? Because you're getting cancer at 25.
Yeah, you've got to look after yourself. So, as we look to wrap things up, I think, there's a lot around Gen Z. I think we've dispelled some myths. We've spoken a lot about what we can do to set up Gen Z for success within an organization. What are practical suggestions that you have around, kind of bridging this gap, not only like the organization, but between generations within an organization, right? Because, it's easier for you to get in a room with like senior leadership and speak to them, but how do you change the reality on the ground and make sure that people from different age groups that, have different priorities or grew up with different, priorities are gelling and working together? How do you get those teams to mesh? Because the reality is you're not going to just have a team of Gen Zers. You'll have a team of Gen X and boomers and whatever the case is in a diverse, large organization.
Yeah. So, firstly, I think my KPI is always incremental growth. I never go for the 100%. I'm always going for the 5 to 25% change, because you'll never get it perfect and there'll always be those challenges. So I think that's kind of like reframing your goals and expectations just around engaging with these different generations and understanding that there will be no perfect policy. There will be no perfect culture. There will be no perfect employee. And the way you see the world and the way they see is very different. And that's the reality. And then the second thing is, I think get a reverse mentor. So, the investor in my business, Shane Mann, he brought me in as his Gen Z reverse mentee. Like, I came in to tell him what he's not doing well as a leader, as a CEO, and helping his business, And so I think a lot of CEOs and, organizational leaders should have the humility to say, we need a Gen Z board, which is an advisory board of Gen Z people that review your guys' products and services and offerings. We need a Gen Z coach. And that doesn't have to be me. That can be your son, your nephew, someone that you're really passionate about, just to gauge that data. All that data allows you to make better decisions. So I think, the second thing is get a Gen Z reverse mentee. And then also invest time in auditing what you have, because I think we're in this rush the whole time around the next project and the next initiative. And if we just had to review what we currently have and make few slight little changes to what we're doing and not be so what is most convenient for me as a leader, then I think people see that and people respect that, and it will create great positive influence in your organization.
Awesome. So I think one thing which, I was thinking of as you were talking about, these life-changing events which influence Gen Z, obviously having this always-on access to internet, and with that information, right, it's influenced Gen Z, right? And I think it goes to your point around abundance of choice, right, where you've almost got too much choice, which in some ways can be crippling or overwhelming. So if you had to give feedback or suggestions to anyone from Gen Z that's listening, what would that be to handle that very real pressure that they're probably feeling?
So I think the first thing is you're never too young to start, and hunger is your greatest gift. So all you have to do is just be hungry. Hungry to learn, hungry to ask questions, hungry to meet people. That's the first step you take. As soon as you've got that, like that already separates you. That already creates momentum in your life. And taking like action, like, a lot of young people, I'll sit and coach them and they say, Marko, like, I have no idea what I want to do with my life. And then I ask them, okay, cool, just tell me what you did yesterday. Take me through your whole 24-hour schedule. I watched Netflix for 10 hours. I saw friends. I went out. Like I was on social media. And then you ask them, like, well, what result do you think that's going to create? And it doesn't create a result because you're sitting and doing nothing all day. And so, like, finding a few actionable items, and I always say the greatest start is just to meet someone and let that lead to something. And then the second thing that I would say is like cold outreach. Most of my opportunities have come from just putting myself out there, throwing an email to some person and saying, Alon, I want to meet with you, or I want to work for you and intern for free, or whatever, whoever the person is. And that often has been my greatest gift. So I think the first thing is hunger and urgency. The two thing is, don't be afraid just because you have no real skill set or experience. The thing you do have is your time. You've got your time, so offer that. And don't be afraid to do something that you don't like, because I didn't do something that I wanted to for such a long period, which has led me to this point where every single day I get to live out my dream day. And then I think lastly is, don't get overwhelmed with the decisions you have to make in a micro. So I love what Gary Vee always says. He says macro patience, micro speed. So don't be so concerned about the day-to-day, about like, what are you career decisions, like what are you studying, or what are you doing in school? Those are small things. Those will pass. I remember in high school, I was like, if I didn't make the A team, and if I didn't get this result, or if I didn't win this public speaking competition, my life was over. But those are such small things in comparison to your whole life. And that's another thing is, when you're young, you feel like, if I haven't achieved by 25, my life's over. But if we get this long-term approach and do things, now I've got this mindset of do things in 10-year timelines. Every one of my goals is in 10-year timelines. And that's the last point is patience, and don't be worried about people and pressures that are telling you need to do things right this second.
Awesome. I think super clear. I think one thing I'd just add around decisions is, like, you make the best decision with information that you have today, right? If in 6 months' time something changes and there's new information and you need to change that decision, right? Obviously there's value in staying power and resilience and grit, like, don't just give up. But if there's new information and, these decisions are not lifelong decisions, right? And I think if you think about decisions in that way, it's not as much pressure in making those decisions.
There's never hindsight, and you can never time the market. You just got to be in it.
Exactly. And if you're not in it, you've got no ticket to the game, right? So put your hat in the ring. Awesome. So Marko, thanks so much. I think we unpacked a lot in this episode, talking about some, myths, some truths about Gen Z, but I think more importantly, focused on practical steps or changes that organizations can make in setting Gen Z up for success, not just in a short-term transactional manner, but in a way that they'll come into the organization and build a long-term career. I think in the same way, Marko shared a lot of his own personal experience, a lot of broader experience around changes that Gen Z should be making themselves to make the most out of their careers. It's not just a function of joining an organization and letting everything be laid out for you. You've got to put in the hard yards and the hard work to make it happen. And hopefully if, Gen Z looks to adapt, if organizations adapt, I think we're in for a rich future. So thank you, Marko. Thank you to those that joined, and hope you've enjoyed.